Okay, I'd like to begin this study session. I want everyone to know that this is being audio recorded, and we are not in our usual spots over on the other side of the room, as we have administrators here and to social distance. We are up at the board table, but this is a work session. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and adjusting your schedules to be here. We have an important discussion to have before we have our board meeting tonight. And I want to make sure that anybody that's remote, if they would leave their video on, especially if they're speaking or if they're a board member. I also want to remind everyone to please speak clearly and loudly so that it's picked up on the audio for all the people out there listening. And to start with, you all received in your packet a little insert from the Minnesota School Board Association regarding getting back to the basics. I think we need to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion tonight and continue on from here. The first one is trust one another. This is not a time to doubt the decisions of fellow board members, superintendent, or staff. School boards hire good people. School board members do not take on the position of a school board member for fun, but for the students and the community. Secondly, put away your baggage. We all have times of disagreement. Let's set it aside and work toward what's best for all. You don't have to sing hands and sing kumbaya, but decide what is most important right now and focus. For teams that have been struggling, this is going to test you and bring out the best or the worst in you. You can decide. And the third, communicate, communicate, communicate. Keep one another informed, and along with the superintendent, move forward with a consistent message. These times are confusing and uncertain for everyone. Clarity builds trust with your team, staff, and community. School board leadership is being tested. Now is the time for all school board members to work with their superintendent in the most collaborative, supportive, and positive way possible. I just want you all to keep that in mind. I think it's a good message. It's an important message for us as we go forward in this discussion tonight and as we enter into a new school year. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Stoddard.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Shimmick, and good evening, board members and administrators and all of you listening to this. The purpose of our study sessions is to share information to ensure that board members have all the information that they need to take action at our regular board meetings. And tonight, the only agenda that we have on this study session is to share with you our Ready to Learn plan as we look at the Minnesota State Learning Plan, to share with you our plan and to ensure that you feel comfortable with the process that we've used and with the plan that we have moving forward, and also to, in the board meeting, to seek action on the resolution. So that's really what is on the agenda for this evening.
Okay, I'll continue.
Then I will. That sounds great. When I was an elementary principal, one of the things that's kind of funny but I was really proud of was we were able to build a culture where students took safety really seriously. And when we had fire drills, they were silent. They would walk out of the school as they were supposed to in their fire drill, and they would come to the playground and all quietly stand there. And when they were quiet, and as I greeted them, I would say, "Hey, Vikings, how did you come to school today?" And they would say, in one huge, loud word, "Ready to learn." So that's why we named this plan our Ready to Learn plan as we think about coming back. This has been a summer and start of the year unlike any other. I want to thank parents and staff members for the input that they've provided. I want to thank board members for the hours that we've spent asking questions, talking to our stakeholders, and thinking about the options as we've talked about the learning models and scenarios. And I want to thank my administrative team. This group has been absolutely unbelievable. Several of them are here this evening, and they'll be a part of sharing our presentation as well as answering any questions that you might have. We've talked a lot this summer about leading in the gray, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We take no pleasure in pandemic planning as educators, but we are ready to start the year and ready to learn. Do I need somebody presenting the presentation? Is that right, Jen? you. So as he gets this up, I'll go ahead and move forward with the outcomes of the evening. I guess it's audio tape, so it's not quite so important, right? Our outcomes this evening for both presentations are that board members will discuss the Prior Lake Savvy Schools Ready to Learn plan, and that board members will take action on the resolution during the board meeting. You can see the way the presentation is outlined. We have a lot of information to share. We'll talk a little bit about process and then move into the health and safety considerations, into our instructional learning models and support student services, and then get into some of our...
This is Enrique. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Enrique.
Enrique, can you hear us?
No.
I think that's.
I'll shoot him a
Text
text.
Jonathan.
Enrique, can you hear us?
Oh, now I can hear you. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
All right. We're gonna pick up right where we did the outline slide, and I will try to present this to you.
Enrique, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. I had
Awesome.
those down for the last 10 minutes, so I wasn't sure if we were waiting for a quorum or what was happening.
Okay. Well, you missed a great introduction that I had, but I will make sure that during the regular board meeting, you hear it again. As I said, then you can see at the end of our presentation, we'll talk about, have department leads share some of the logistics of our plan. In terms of the planning process and timeline, the next visual, Jeff, if you want to forward just a couple slides, one more. This visual is one that the board has seen before. We used it as we started the beginning of the planning process in June. We had focus groups where 3 major themes emerged, which we paid attention to through the entire time of our planning. We then took those themes and really had our departments and our program teams work with other stakeholders to get their plans in place. And then we started integrating those plans and recognizing the interconnection of all of us as we continue to work. We set up an incident command model, which is going to help us when we actually get into the implementation stages. And really, our efforts for all of these plans has been to seamlessly move the dial and move between learning models as our data dictates. You can also see on this next slide our return to school planning process. And that, again, just lays out a little bit more how we gathered input, which Kristen will talk about in a minute. We developed scenarios and engaged our stakeholders. We paid attention to the MDE guidance and then continued our planning, which you are hearing about this evening. And then ultimately, as decisions are made, we'll focus on the communication of that. With that, I'll turn it over to Kristen to talk a bit about stakeholder engagement.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Chair Shumick, Dr. Solo, and all the board directors here tonight. So there were a number of ways that we engaged with the community in general through stakeholder engagement. We started actually in late May with some focus groups. And so we asked for feedback on the 3 different learning models that would be out there. So we had about 50 families that were a part of that. So that includes students, parents, guardians, and the point of the focus groups was to make sure that we got many different perspectives. So we made a point that we were getting feedback from diverse groups. Later in June, we had a survey that was giving us information about learning model preferences, families, and transportation. And we had 6,700 responses, which is really high. That's fantastic. Then in the middle of July, we did some focus interviews specifically about district communication to find out about people's preferences and what worked well as far as getting messages out to people, where their preferred methods of that were. At the end of July, we had another survey that was about the 3 different hybrid models that would be possible, or that we thought were possible at that moment, and we got 2,400 responses about those, which helped us to narrow those hybrid models down. And then at the end of July, we set the Distance Learning Academy form out, and so that is an opportunity for families to choose to do distance learning only, And then we also got information about transportation and that survey is currently open through August 14th. And we already have like 5,500 students are accounted for in that survey so far. We also did some stakeholder engagement with staff. And that again started with those focus groups that I had touched on that we also did with families. We went through every employment category in Prior Lake Savage area schools and made sure that people were included. People participated in focus groups in small groups of 10, and they gave feedback on those 3 different learning models as the families did. And in the focus groups, they actually had a chance to have a conversation with each other and kind of refine ideas. And then we used the information from that to help us in our planning all the way along. So Dr. Salo earlier had shown a picture of our process working through. A vital part of that was actually getting information from stakeholders, staff, and families. We also had a fall planning survey at the end of June for staff, which was to get their questions and concerns to help inform staffing needs. We had some focus interviews about communication for staff as well. And then had a survey on the different hybrid models where we got 600 responses in late July. And then there was an opportunity for staff to give some narrative feedback on the different hybrid models, which was done at the school building level, and principals collected that. We used that as well to inform our planning further. There was a survey at the end of July, which was a place where people could talk about their commitment and their intentions for returning to work. And then another survey at the end of July, which closed on the 3rd, with some hybrid model feedback from the built teams. And so those are the building instructional leadership teams at every school.
Great, thank you very much. Our process and stakeholder engagement helped inform our planning and prepare us for the announcement that the governor and MDE gave regarding how we would be opening the school year. That decision from MDE came on July 30th, and it provided a framework for districts to ensure a localized, data-driven approach. We're prepared tonight to share with you our plans aligned to all of the guidance from the Minnesota Department of Health and MDE, and the process we've used to bring a recommendation for how to start the year with you. So just to highlight a couple of those on the next slide, you can see that date again where we got guidance on the criteria for school start. On the 3rd was the first meeting that I had officially with the Scott County Health, and we have a plan in place that I'll share later about weekly meetings that Scott County Health will be having with Scott County superintendents. On the 7th, I also contacted MDE to talk about the Minnesota Department of Health consultation requirement. I was told at that time that since the recommendation that I would be bringing forward was aligned to the data from the district and was not recommending something that was more restrictive or less restrictive, that I did not have to have a formal consultation. Right now, the Minnesota Department of Health and MDE are working on regional support teams. So there will be a support team to districts in the metro area. And then tonight we've got both the study session and the meeting about our plan. Pending board approval, we'll communicate with staff and families tomorrow about the model and details about the start of the year.
Excuse me, can I put a pause for a second? This is it showing on our website. We may have some
Please
audio
stand
failure
by.
out to the public, so just check that.
Thank you for interrupting me. Sure we get it right.
Streamed right now, we'll have those recordings ready and hopefully be ready to live stream. I'm not sure, part of it was a problem with the storm last night, but we've got some folks that are working on it right now.
On the health and safety side, I will have Joe Kabushak come up and Maureen Mullen,
Jeff, did we
lead us
pause?
through. It's already been
It
reserved.
is.
Yep, thank you. We'll have them lead us through this portion on the health and safety, and then Jim Querum will be coming up as well for the staffing consideration slide.
So as a reminder, Joe is serving this year as our district COVID coordinator and helping to coordinate and ensure consistent communication of all of our plans.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Schmidt, Dr. Stella, members of the board. This is Maureen Mullins speaking. I've been working together with Joe Kabuchek, putting together our health and safety protocols, practices, and procedures for safe reopening of schools. We've put together a document in along the same lines as the HR document on return to work, using some of the same formatting, addressing the 5 areas of cleaning, disinfecting, indoor air quality, seating, circulation and signage, personal protective equipment, and screening, reporting, and tracking. So these are based on the requirements and recommendations from MDE, MDH, CDC, OSHA, and several other organizations. We have the 5 bullet points up on the board. I'm going to go through the first 4. Joel will address the last one, unless you need to jump in at this point. All right.
Sounds
Please feel free to ask questions as we go along, or we can certainly
I
respond
think
at
we'll
the
try
end.
and wait till the end of the presentation.
Absolutely, okay, sorry. So our first, cleaning and disinfecting, we've put together an enhanced cleaning and disinfectant protocol where we have identified high-touch surfaces and areas of the building, divided the buildings into types of rooms. We've addressed how many times per day, what cleaning agent and disinfecting agent we're going to use, and who is responsible for cleaning that area. We have a document, there's a spreadsheet that addresses all the different types of buildings. So it is enhanced, so it is increasing frequency for these high-touch areas. We are, for indoor air quality, also under cleaning and disinfecting, so we are in the areas where we do not have hand wash stations in the classrooms, we will be providing hand sanitizer in those classrooms and also in common spaces and public spaces. The second area is indoor air quality. So we are using the ASHRAE guidelines for the MERV rating for our air filtration. We are doing our preventive maintenance program, which is a monthly documented reporting and tracking of the maintenance that we do, which includes regularly changing our filters as well as other maintenance equipment. For seating, circulation, and signage, we are using the recommendations from MDH and MDE for the types of signage, whether it's for social distancing, for masking, for encouraging hand washing, etc. They have a very specific list of types of signage that they want listed. We are working with our site administration, and Joe and I are meeting with the site administration, with the lead custodian at each building to determine the site-specific details of each of their signage and circulation plans. For personal protective equipment, we have purchased and have on hand disposable masks, face shields, hand sanitizer, and gloves for staff and students. So we have, we will also be receiving some of those products from the state of Minnesota. At the time we ordered them earlier this summer, we wanted to make sure we had them on hand, and not knowing what supplies would be available when school came around, hearing about backlogs and orders and that sort of things. Turn it over to Joe.
Thank you. I'll touch briefly on the screening, reporting, and tracking that we'll be doing. The screening is obviously one of the most important things, making sure that our staff and our families are doing a daily self-screening of COVID-19 symptoms. And so we will be sending home more information for families a little bit later in the summer. As far as staff are concerned, they've already seen this initial self-screening form so that they are able to do that prior to entering any of our buildings currently. Anytime that someone is starting to develop symptoms, student or staff, they are to report that to their building principal or supervisor. At that point, then we have a tracking process where we will be keeping track of the symptoms that are seen the day that they started, so that we're able to know kind of the progress that that student or staff member has. Also, if a staff member or student comes down as a lab confirmed positive or has a confirmed exposure, fitting under that definition of within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, what we will do is we will document that. That will then trigger messages sent to Human Resources for working with the individual as far as leave concerns. It'll send a message to Operations for cleaning purposes. It'll send a message to myself because I need to reach out to the Department of Health and report all lab confirmed cases. That will actually start the tracking process as far as tracing is concerned, and I'll be working with the Department of Health, looking at seating charts that we will use for all of our students so we know who they had contact with during the day. Thank you.
Next. Good afternoon. From the HR perspective, a lot of our energy is spent towards looking at staffing considerations. And so here are some of the things that are going on within staffing, how we're planning, and what we hope to do as far as process as we move along here. We've been collaborating a lot, often with union employee groups, not only getting feedback, but keeping them aware of what their folks in their bargaining unit are going to be hearing from us, so giving them sort of that preemptive shout out that here's what you can expect, what questions might they have, and to try to run a little interference on there and get good information out to everybody. We created a staff return to work protocol that actually started early summer when Kids Company came back, and we've been refining it ever since. It outlines all the procedures, it addresses the guidance, the protocols address all the things that employees would need to know based upon CDC guidance, MDH, MDE, all of those references, and we keep those up to date. We look at them regularly to see as guidance changes, are all of our links up to date, that sort of thing. So staff has access to that. There's also required staff certification of a daily checklist that they're going through that checklist fashioned after, actually it is the MDH guide checklist, I believe. We've created a staff resource to collect and put in anything a staff member might need to know about process and procedures, leaves, employee assistance program, and we keep that up to date as well, that they have access to. It's grown into quite a document with the index and the whole works. It's getting quite lengthy. Along with that, we send out a Friday HR email highlighting things like the employee assistance program, or you need to fill out this form to give us your indication of fall, whatever that might be. So trying to find many modes of communication in order to help our employees feel comfortable in making a decision and knowing what's expected of them if they come back. Also, we're going to be working closely with building principals as we look at a distant learning academy and how many teachers do we need, how do we choose those teachers, what that looks like as well. That'll be one of our next steps here in the next week or two. And the other big push will be, as we sent out last week and got indications from staff who will be back no matter what, who might come back but might need accommodations or may need to leave. And now we're beginning to work with all those individual employees on what paperwork they have to fill out and just really finding out, do they qualify for one of those reasons or not, to really help our principals understand who may or may not be here and what we might have to adjust as far as staffing is concerned over the next month. And the last thing I'd mention is we've been partnering with Teachers on Call. We've had regular conversations with them. They have tailored their training to get ready for fall. They've surveyed our regular Prior Lake subs once or twice already to find out what their concerns are, and then fashioned the training around that. And we've had a good response from that as well. So far, most of them say they'll come back and sub, so we'll see what happens over the next month. So some of the things we're doing in relation to staffing considerations.
what you see here is the Department of Health, Minnesota Department of Health and MDE has laid out some requirements for us if we are having students in the building. And so what you see there is on the left-hand side are the requirements that we need to have in place, whether we are in person or in hybrid, including some of the things that'll be talked about tonight, including masking policies, cleaning procedures, which we've already discussed, having a program and building COVID-19 coordinator, and monitoring for illnesses. On the right-hand side, what you see is when we go to, or if we go to hybrid learning, there is some additional requirement that is needed, and that's really around capacity and social distancing. And so when we are in a hybrid model, we have to make sure that we are preparing ourselves for that 6-foot social distancing for all times, facilities at a 50% capacity, transportation at a 50% capacity, and then of course, as Jim just mentioned, making sure we have the appropriate staff for that model.
Good evening, Chair Shimmick, members of the board, Dr. Stallo. The next section is on the instructional learning models that we've been working on as a district. Over the past several months, we've had several months of planning. As you heard tonight, we've received feedback from stakeholders, from families to staff, focus groups. We also are looking at the guidance from Department of Health, Department of Education, following those health and safety protocols, and most recently, Stay Safe Minnesota components. And that's been central to our planning of the 3 instructional models, which are in-person, hybrid, and distance. One of the things I think it's important for us all to know is that regardless of the model that we're in this year, in-person, hybrid, or distant, there will be consistent practices and materials for all modes. And I think number 1 is Prior Lake Savage Area Schools teachers, Prior Lake Savage Area School support, Prior Lake Savage Area School rigor. Learning facilitated by our staff, highly trained staff and teachers working with students, academically, socially, and emotionally. And in our feedback we received, that was a very consistently high request and a high expectation that people wanted to be involved with students, whether they're a staff member and also from the parent perspective as well. Equitable access to technology. Students will be issued a district device. K2 will receive iPads, 3 through 5 Chromebooks, 6 through 12 iPads. And so we've had several meetings recently around technology. We've had to go through and disassemble our carts, which have been in the buildings, in order to prepare for this deployment for the year. And then as you can see there, embedded academic support, as well as social emotional learning across the different levels of elementary, middle school, and high school. Attendance, grading, and communication will be consistent as well. Students having asynchronous and synchronous work opportunities with teachers. Grading students will be graded in similar ways and methods as their peers. And then communication, using our learning management systems of Seesaw at the elementary, Schoology at the secondary, and then our student information system, Infinite Campus. So our in-person learning model, as you can see, here is all students attending school every day with additional safety precautions, including practicing social distance where possible. Certainly this is what we're all aspiring to, and the model we hope to be doing one day, but it's not looking like that's going to be the model we can do in the near future. But I think on behalf of most in the district, I think we all look to have this day back to us, or where we're in person learning with students and staff as quick as we can, but we know that in the current situation with the pandemic, that's going to take some time. I'm going to spend a little time talking about the hybrid learning model, and again, you heard Kristlyn talk about feedback on the models that were received. Hybrid learning is all students learning through a combination of learning at home and in-person learning at school, with strict social distancing and capacity limits. The hybrid learning model that Prior Lake Savage Area Schools will be pending board approval is implementing in a hybrid situation an A-B flex A-B schedule, where students will be split into 2 groups, where they will have 2 days of in-person instruction, 2 days of in-home instruction, and then that 3rd day distance learning and flex. Flex days are opportunities where students can come in for intervention, individual, small group, work with their staff, enrichment, or specific classes. On the flex day, students will also be released 2 hours early for distance learning so that they can continue their learning at home. One of the things that's been a particular challenge of the hybrid schedule is having common preparation and collaboration time for our staff and our teachers. And given the essential ability for our staff to collaborate together, we needed to find time for staff to have that collaboration time from a curriculum alignment as well as a consistent expectations for students so that there is consistency throughout this experience. One of the feedback components we heard last spring is that teachers did a wonderful job, but consistency between classroom and between teachers could be a little tighter. And so this is something that certainly is our goal to do moving forward under this hybrid model. In a hybrid model, here's a draft calendar. Again, you can see an AB, Flex AB. Group A students would come on Mondays and Thursdays. B would be Tuesday, Fridays with the Flex days during Wednesdays. Again, looking for consistency, as we know that planning is essential for families. Secondly, we also know too, came through our process of developing and talking about this, the importance of teachers seeing students in person multiple times a week, as well as hybrid home multiple times a week as well. Here is a sample K-5 schedule of what a hybrid in-person day would look like. Again, morning meeting, you have your content area times. You also see outdoor learning there. I don't think we can stress that enough, that teachers across the district encouraging them to get outside with their students in order for learning, socialization. Again, we've heard the benefits from the Department of Health, and so as an East-Em district, that's something that we can certainly lean on as we move forward as part of the experience for students. You see a hybrid home day there, balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning options with teacher schedule and available time for individual small group instruction, independent practice and learning, and then also too preparing for the next in-person learning day. Flex day I spoke about a little bit on the last slide. In person, students that are coming in are participating in small groups, instruction from perhaps intervention or specialists. Majority of students will be on a distance learning format during that day. So teachers will have scheduled and available time for students that are at home for distance learning as well. Secondary hybrid schedule, middle school and high school will operate within the 6-period day schedule. Again, more connection points for students and teachers during the week for academic, social, and emotional support. Synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities for students each day. The flex days, again, designed with staff and student connections, academic intervention, and then also staff team collaboration and planning time. You can see here a sample schedule of what the day will look like for middle school as well as high school. For both, they're following their 6 periods, so they are connecting with teachers according to the classes that they're registered for. Hybrid home day, they're following their typical schedule from home with live check-in opportunities, and of course the flex day. The distance learning model, we also spend considerable time talking about this as per the governor's executive order. Having a distance learning model for families to opt into is part of the legislation, or part of the guidance or mandate that has come, is that students will learn at home and receive daily live interaction with their licensed teachers. Distance learning will be used full-time as students and staff are not allowed to be in buildings as directed under the Minnesota State Safe Learning Plan. And this year's program reflects improvements over last year's based on staff, parent, student feedback. One of the things that it's been well known, or maybe it's well known because we've been working on it quite a bit, is that districts have to be ready to move between these 3 models during the course of the school year. And so hybrid learning, distance learning are certainly 2 models that as a district we've been focusing on because it's highly understood that depending on the numbers from Scott County and how we go through that decision-making process, which Dr. Stalo will be talking about later in the presentation, we need to be ready and be able to shift into these different models accordingly. I'm going to ask Dr. Schuttinger to come up and to give an overview of our Distance Learning Academy. As he's making his way up here, the distance learning component, as we make those decisions about moving out of hybrid into distance learning, staff A and B students would be at home during that time and then working with their teacher on their particular schedules.
Thank you. Good evening, board members, Chair Shimmick, Dr. Stalo. I'm proud to introduce one of our newest additions to the district, the Distance Learning Academy. As you can see on the slide here, the governor's executive order mandates that all districts offer an equitable distance learning model in addition to the three options Jeff just described, or the three learning models. So on that dial, we could be moving between in-person, hybrid, and distance. But in addition to those three within the dial, we also are mandated to offer a distance learning option separate from those. So we are offering this and making this an option for all of our students, K-12. And it's a different option in case parents or families don't feel comfortable or have an underlying medical condition and don't feel safe sending their kids to school. As Jeff mentioned before, some of the consistent factors are equitable access to our highly trained and highly qualified teachers, our support, Prior Lake Savage Area School support, and our access to equitable technology. So Distance Learning Academy students would have the same access to tech resources as all of our other students. Attendance would be pretty similar to what attendance would be in person or in a hybrid model. So attendance would be taken every day. Students would be expected to either attend their synchronous opportunities or also check in with teachers on asynchronous tasks. For each and every day in every period in secondary and every subject area in elementary, there will be live synchronous instruction and student support, checking for understanding, answering questions, things like that. Grading will be very similar to the in-person and hybrid students in our current systems of grading and assessment. Students would be held to the same assessments, the common assessments that we have in the same grading system. And then communication, as Jeff mentioned, would be very, very similar. They'll be using Seesaw in elementary, Schoology in secondary, and Infinite Campus as the LMS. So a lot of the pieces are very, very common across all of these models. This is some example schedules. So, and it's really a little bit different in elementary versus secondary. And that's based on parent interest in the Distance Learning Academy and how we can staff and provide the best quality instruction for our students. So in elementary, there's a little more flexibility in that we may have, depending on the numbers and pending board approval, the opportunity to assign specific teachers to be a distance learning second grade teacher, for example, or a distance learning kindergarten teacher. And they would be facilitating distance learning for that entire group of students. And so this example schedule, they might have a live teacher session in the morning, and they're going to start with, just as they would in person, a morning meeting. An SE, a social emotional learning check-in to make sure that all students are connected and doing well. They might have some live instruction during that block in reading or math, and then they might move into smaller group sessions in order to really individualize and personalize that instruction. In the afternoon, they might have pre-recorded video lessons and some other small group sessions depending on student needs, and then a final block they might have independent learning. This schedule is highly flexible, but one of the guarantees is that there will be live synchronous morning meetings. There will be live synchronous instruction in reading and math, and there will be small group instruction and support for our students in the Distance Learning Academy. In 6-12 in secondary, our Distance Learning Academy students will be following their same schedule that they're already assigned to. So they'll be following the same class schedule that they would be following if they were hybrid or in person. So they would have 6 periods. Each of our teachers will have a period of their class. Even if they're teaching hybrid students in person, they will have a period of the class that they're live streaming instruction or taking questions from the Distance Learning Academy students and checking for understanding so that those students are getting a daily touch point and support and making sure they're making progress. What this model does in secondary is it gives our students access to the same high-quality electives and choice that they can have, that they couldn't have in another model. So we have our same highly qualified world language teachers, our German teachers, our BC Calc teachers who are not easily replicated. So we have our same high-quality, highly trained teachers available to provide this learning for kids. And we also, on top of that, have a distance learning academy coach for each of our secondary students. And then that's just another layer of support to check in with students, making sure they're making good progress. In secondary, we'll also be integrating social emotional learning and support through advisory, BAR, and some other avenues that we have for in-person students as well. We'll pass off to Becca, I believe.
I'll go find Becca.
She's right there.
Good evening, Dr. Stalo, Chair Schmidt, and board members. So I'm here tonight to speak with you about our early childhood program options for the 2020-2021 school year. So as you can see on the early learning slide, we have a very positive first paragraph where in-person and hybrid learning models are able to be identical. So what that means is the student schedule will not change, regardless of us being placed in a full in-person model or us being placed in a hybrid learning model. And we are able to do that because we have doubled the amount of physical space in which we can operate for this school year. So we're able to operate with those hybrid learning model safety procedures, whether or not we're full in-person or in hybrid. So that looks like smaller class sizes. That looks like specific cohorts of students. That looks like managing the multiple programs that occur within that space. As you know, we have school readiness preschool, we have early childhood and family education, we have early learning screening. So one of those programs, we already do a curbside drop-off and pickup. That's a procedure that we have well in hand, and we can do that with just a few additional safety measures for that cohort group. And then we'll manage our entrance for very specific programs that have parent involvement, so early childhood family education and screening, having them enter and exit from a specific door that is not where our preschool is occurring. Should we be in a distance learning model, the state has designated the academic learning that we focus on to be language and literacy and number sense. We would also like to include social emotional learning, and that's a decision we're making as a program. The state would like every program to do that, but they recognize for an early learning program in a distance learning setting, that's challenging to get all of that data that you need. However, for us, that is ultimately our number one is social emotional learning and support for both the students and the parents. So we would include those three pieces. It would include a connection with the teacher, and it would include activities sent that would be as screen-free as possible for our students. And as the last paragraph states, it would follow all of those state safety guidelines regardless of the model that we're in. And I think one area in particular where we shine in early learning is nature. We go outdoors in all weather. It might be an indoor recess day for elementary and our kiddos are outside. And we do that by front-loading parents with the proper gear that they would need to provide for their child to be safe. And we are really, really great at bringing that learning outdoors and having a natural observational assessment. So we're gonna work hard, we're gonna do great, we're gonna keep people safe. Any questions?
We'll take the questions at the end.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone.
All right. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of student support services. Student support services are learning models for special education, EL students. We're going to continue to provide that continuum of services, just as we have in the regular school year. And so that may look like pushing in to general ed classrooms the 2 days a week that students are in person. It may mean also delivering distance learning pieces or those at-home pieces. In addition to that, it may mean that we have students that are going to come in on that flex day to get more service. It just really depends on what the individual student needs are and what that IEP says. So our goal is to try to get more in-person time with our students with special education and EL needs. And so really just basing it on individual personalized plans that we have in place, working with general education teachers to ensure that accommodations and modifications are provided. And that will hold true as well for students with 504 plans.
Step, and as Jim makes his way up, you'll see that we're going to be just briefly doing some overviewing on transportation, child nutrition services, child care, co-curriculars, and finance.
Good evening, Chair Shimmick, School Board, Dr. Stallo. Transportation is, we're creating a plan that will work no matter what model we're in. Bus routes will remain the same. We're also looking at ways to identify children so there's no confusion on who's getting on the bus if we go to the AB model. We also are working on, we know there's gonna be a lot of congestion at school sites, and so we're working through that as well. But the big takeaway for us is that bus routes will remain the same, no matter which model we're in. It offers consistency for parents and students. Sorry. So we will provide the same routes daily. Student assignment timelines, we're working on that right now. We have all our routes in. We are working on a way to identify which children go on which day. Bus capacity is at 37. That's a hard stop for us. Bus company has plans to clean the bus between each route, sanitize the bus. And again, we anticipate a high level of interest in families driving their children to school.
Thanks,
Thank
Jim.
you.
I think we'll transition to child nutrition services as Emily comes in. And we know, board members, this is a very high overview. We're trying to go quickly so that we can get your questions answered, which is what's most important to us.
Good evening, everyone. So for kiddos that are coming down to eat in our cafeteria in either a hybrid or in-person scenario, they would be eating in the cafeteria. We'll keep for the hybrid scenario, we'll keep the cafeteria capacity at 50%. We'll keep them socially distanced using floor markers while they're waiting in line. The high touch points such as pin pads will be eliminated or sanitized in between each student. There will be no more self-serving of food. They'll all be grab-and-go foods, or child nutrition services staff will put the food directly on the student's tray. So there'll be students will be grabbing at anything and retouching things. So that includes silverware, condiments, napkins, everything will be placed on their tray. Once kids go through the line the first time, they'll sit down and then stay seated. And then if they want an extra milk or they drop their fork or anything, then we will bring that to them. And then in late August, early September, we'll be doing a lot of extra training with our child nutrition employees about COVID and the prevention of spreading disease. So, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. For child care, it'll be available at all of our elementary schools, with priority registration going to Tier 1 essential workers at no cost during the student day. However, there will be fees if they would like to come before school or after school. Registration for non-essential Tier 1 families will be fee-based, and it'll be available before, during, and after school. And it'll be on a space available basis in order to meet the health and safety guidelines. And care will be provided by Kids Company and will be available from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. for all 3 instructional models: in-person, hybrid, and distance learning. Instructional support from our school district will be provided during the school day when students are not in person.
I think the only thing that I'd like to add to that before Leanne goes is we have one of the parts that we seek approval of our base learning plan is we do have, as part of our Tier 1 employees, educators who are instructionally engaged with students are a part of that Tier 1. We would like to recommend that we extend that tier 1 child care to all children of all of our staff who attend our school district.
Very similar to what we did in the spring. Thank you.
Oops.
Good evening. My name is Russ Reitz, the Activities Director for those that are listening at home. We're following the recommendations of the State High School League in terms of what sports we're going to offer this fall. Football and volleyball were moved to what they call a skinny season. That will exist sometime in March between our traditional winter and spring seasons. District administration met today to talk about intramural offerings, activities, student clubs, and decisions on those will be made in the next couple of weeks. We are going to move forward with some limitations in terms of number of athletes in cross-country, soccer, tennis, and swim and dive, along with MDH recommendations for crowd and transportation limitations.
The only addition I'd like to add, when we met today about the facility use, is one of the other challenges that we have obviously is ensuring that our buildings are cleaned well every single night, and that's going to take some staffing, creativity in terms of ensuring that we have the staff who can clean those and the buildings are empty. So there will be a need for us to minimize some of the facility use that we currently have for some of our partners. So we'll be looking at exactly what we can do and what that communication looks like. I think especially as we begin the year, we're going to have to be sure that we limit that facility use to outside users so that we get a sense of what our routines are going to be under the models that we have.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Stello. You've seen this before, and this is the additional funding that the district will receive between the governor's emergency education relief and the elementary and secondary schools education relief, which is federal dollars. And so we should receive we will receive $432,465. Of that, about $15,000 we'll be reserving for our non-public schools until we know the exact number of what that will be for the fall. And then we'll be allocating those funds for a wide variety of reasons that we can use them, including technology, cleaning supplies, mental health, and to maintain our just regular educational services. We're already utilizing some of these funds for different things that are needed, and just in terms of sanitation and masks and those kinds of things. And so I'm expecting this money to go fairly quickly. And I just read an article that it's going to cost school districts quite a bit of money just to maintain the safety for our students. And so we're hoping we actually will receive some additional funding from the federal and government for that reason.
So quickly, as you saw, we gave you an overview of each department, each section, and we'll be happy to take questions in just a moment. I'm going to move over to, thanks Jeff very much. As we look at the process that we're going to be using to move forward with decision making, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but each Friday I will be meeting along with Joe, with the county, state, or the Scott County health officials and superintendents to review the most current data. What they'll provide is data up to the Tuesday prior to that Friday. So we'll get that 2-week number, which they've been providing to us. Immediately after that meeting each Friday, I'll meet with our incident command team. That command team is a mixture of our actual incident command team as well as representatives of our district crisis response team to make sure that as we brief our team on the freshest county data, we'll also get an opportunity to hear from HR, a briefing on where we are with staff absences. We'll get a brief from teaching and learning and enrollment on the student absences. We'll get briefings on other situations that we should be paying attention to in our schools. And that'll help us make a determination of if we maintain the learning model that we have or if any change needs to be made. I want you to know that some of the regulations are in terms of transitioning from one model to the other. If we transition to a less restrictive model, So if we go from distance learning to a hybrid, that can occur no sooner than every 2 weeks. So we need to be sure that we're in that model. If we're in distance learning, we're in distance learning for at least 2 weeks. However, if we go to a more restrictive model, we're able to do that a little bit faster. So if we're in hybrid model, but that our numbers would show that we need to move to a more restrictive model, we would be able to do that quicker. One of the reasons that Wednesday Flex Day seems to work well for us, if we get information every Friday on the most updated numbers that we have, and we realize that we do need to go to a more restrictive model, we could have our A students come back, so half of our kids would come back on Monday. We could make that decision on a Friday and communicate it to our families. Our A students could come back and get some final instruction from teachers, as well as get devices or other learning materials they may need at home. That Tuesday, our B students would come to be able to do the same. On Wednesday, if teachers needed a transitional day to get ready, we would have that built in, and then we could go ahead and begin the next learning model almost immediately without losing any additional instructional time. And based on the current data, again, this was as the data that I received as of last Friday. The numbers in Scott County would indicate that based on the model that the state provides, which will be the next slide, we would recommend a hybrid model to start the year at both the elementary and the secondary, at the secondary levels. You'll see the disclaimer there. We know that we will continue to monitor this data daily in case there's any need for a change that would be necessary. Just pulling up right now, these are the numbers that have been indicated by the framework set out by MVE and the government as guidance. Again, as part of our incident command, we'll also be working with others to see what other parts of data we need to look at more locally to determine if any other change would be warranted outside of these numbers. And then lastly, just want to again reiterate that recommendation. Again, we recognize that we are still several weeks out from the start of the year. We also know that our community is expecting, as we were expecting a decision in July, we were expecting a decision. So again, I'm comfortable with that recommendation based on the data today, knowing that that could change. And then lastly, pending board approval, our next steps would be that if the board does approve the plan and the way that we would start the year, we plan to communicate to staff and to parents tomorrow. We'll continue the detailed planning of the work. We'll work with staff, students, and families to implement the plan. We know that our staff are going to be a huge part of the implementation process, and that work will start immediately, working on both hybrid as well as distance learning. And then we're going to remain flexible and responsive to uncertainty as we continue to plan forward during this pandemic. With that, board members, we have lots of administrators here, and we are happy to answer your questions.
Before you start, my understanding is the audio is not live streaming right now, so it is being recorded, so they'll be able to be heard tomorrow. Hopefully, our meeting with the presentation, we're going through the presentation again during our meeting, so that will be hopefully live streamed video and audio. So just FYI, yes.
Sounds like the electric storm last night must have harmed the equipment. So to Chair Schmick's point, we'll have live stream video working, but hopefully we can get it working. We're looking at it right now. Let's hopefully have it ready for you.
Before we start, I believe all the board members had a chance to look at the presentation ahead of time, had a chance to ask questions of Terry and Jeff, go over some things in a little bit more detail. However, after the presentation and hearing from all the administrators, does anyone have any questions they'd like to start with? Stacey?
I just had a couple questions. So transportation, the charter schools, non-public are gonna be riding.
Correct.
That's normal. And we have, the 37 student max, that's obviously with them included.
They also have that same restriction, yes.
And they would be adhering to all the same guidelines.
Yep, the same practices and guidelines that we are under.
So
as far as, and this might be Joe here, a tracking standpoint. So if there's a case at one of those schools, and we have to contact Trace, and those students are on the bus, I'm assuming we're going to that level, is there a mechanism between the schools to, or is that through the county? I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
It
that's-
would begin with us. We will be enforcing a seating chart on a bus. So we will be able to identify the students that are on the bus, where they're sitting, whether they're one of our students or attending one of the local parochial schools, and be able to work with those administrators in those other buildings.
So they'll be reporting back and forth?
Yes.
Either vice versa, if our student get,
Correct.
Okay, so I just wanna make sure that happens.
And if I could add to that too,
Yep.
they have their own routes, so they're not mixing with our children.
They're
So
not?
we have routes for,
Is that new?
no,
Oh, they've always had their own separate route?
the only
Oh.
one, yes.
I guess I did was a new.
So Sage and Westwood, they mingle,
Okay. so
but they're
we-
both district-wide, but they're all part of Exeter area students. Aspen has different routes, and St. Mike's has different routes.
Okay, so we literally have a bus of Aspen kids driving around,
Yes.
and then we drop that?
Mhm.
7 of them, yep.
Okay, oh, I thought we were intermixing. Okay. That's not really good.
Thank you.
Makes clarification.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
question.
And then, I just wanted clarification on the Distance Learning Academy. I just wanna make sure I heard this right. So, on the secondary level, teachers, by subject, whatever, they'll have a certain amount of students that are assigned, they're coming hybrid, so half one day, half the other.
Yep.
And then they also will have kids, Distance Academy, a certain number, or?
Right, so imagine if right now there's, 35 kids in the high school chemistry course. You might have 5 of them, say, in the Distance Learning Academy, and then the rest of the 30 left would be on the A or B hybrid schedule. So those Distance Learning Academy kids would be connected to that class as well.
But as far as ratios, and we're keeping that in mind, I'm assuming with.
Absolutely.
So that those numbers will be lower for in-person, so that they're not being overloaded.
Absolutely.
With the distance. So then on the elementary level, I thought I heard this before, I wasn't sure, when I was asking questions. Those will be more like an assigned teacher, not necessarily like, hey, I'm at Jeffers Pond, I'm only gonna be with Jeffers Pond kids who are choosing distance learning. I might be with 30 different, or whatever, 25 different kids from all over, and this is my distance teacher, this is who I'm gonna be with.
Correct. So it could be 5 students from Jeffers Pond second grade, 5 students from Westwood, 5 students from Hamilton, depending on how the numbers play out. But yeah, that's what it would look like.
And then I know from a commitment standpoint on the distance learning, I think we've just asked for first quarter, correct? And so, I think that's super nice. I mean, I know other programs and other districts are like requiring a year, but giving people a chance to check it out. But from a staffing standpoint, I could see that being challenging if something changes after first quarter. What are we thinking on that? I mean, just as far as, we're gonna be okay with people going in and out, I mean, staffing wise, is that gonna be?
In elementary, it would be far more challenging for people to go in and out. I mean, we definitely want to give parents the opportunity to experience Distance Learning Academy. I'm really excited about it. I think there are incredible opportunities for really individualized, personalized instruction in this model. But we don't want to make parents commit to a year right now when they're not comfortable, and they don't know what it is. But I think that may be something we can consider is after parents have had a chance to experience the Distance Learning Academy, make sure it's a good fit for them and for their own kids, to make that commitment at the elementary level, I would say. In elementary, that staffing piece makes it a little more complicated for students to go in and out. Now, on a case-by-case basis, we will be flexible, and we will meet the needs of kids and parents based on where they're at. If we have a hybrid student who says, I thought this was gonna be right for me, but I can't do this, for whatever reason, we'll have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis, and accommodate for our kids and for our families. On a secondary level, it's much easier on a quarter basis for students to come in or out of the Distance Learning Academy, because they are following that 6-period day schedule. They are, essentially on the same pace as their in-person or hybrid cohort. and the teacher will be the same. So it's a much simpler setting.
One of the things we might most likely look at, exactly what Kevin just talked about, it's gonna be really hard for us to allow parents to opt in and out on a quarterly basis. So we didn't want them to have to commit to the whole year, as other districts have done starting. So we asked for that first quarter commitment. Probably by the end of September, first part of October, we will ask, moving forward, for a commitment for the rest of the year. Because to Kevin's point, that challenge at the elementary level of staffing, we could have some students who have different teachers, you know, based on if we have a lot more who opt in to Distance Learning Academy after that first quarter, or if we have a lot fewer. So that will be a different challenge at the elementary level than it is at the secondary level.
And then I have a question on targeted services. Just from the standpoint of students receiving those services, I think that's where last spring.
Hold on.
Okay.
You need to.
Just from the targeted services, just in the standpoint of students, you know, that are receiving that, is there, you know, I think with last spring, you know, I know that we really experienced some inequities with how, you know, the programming was going, because, you know, it was last minute and we all were, you know, rushing to do our best. But is there a way, I guess I'm asking this question, will there be at some point a possibility if we feel like a kid is not getting it, that they would be here 4 days a week instead of 2? I mean, you know, in a hybrid model, is that a possibility? Is that something that, you know what I'm saying, if we really feel like, yeah. If we really feel like it's not working for students, or us students? Is there, yeah,
Second
yeah,
too.
yeah.
We have been talking about using some sort of matrix so that we can make data-based decisions. So in terms of determining if students need to come in for more, what is that data that we're gonna look at in terms of whether it's EL, special ed, targeted services, intervention?
Yeah, just anyone who,
Yep.
yeah. So there is something being driven that we're gonna.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're working with elementary principals in getting that set.
Yeah, and I think just my concern is, you know, obviously we're gonna have ongoing to make sure we're assessing how these kids are doing, and if there is that need, that gets addressed. I think, one question, you know, that's probably out there from the public standpoint, and just maybe to take a step back, is when you were looking at the specific hybrid models, the model in which K through 5 was in, because I know some other districts have picked this, 4 days a week, or 5 days, you know, whatever, in more frequently than the secondary. Why did we land on this type of hybrid model as compared to?
I'll start and I'll let Jeff chime in with some of the details if he wants, but we actually, the first time that we started to look at that, we looked at, could we get all K-6 kids to school and 9th grade to school 4 days a week? And as we examined the staffing, the space constraints, and really, how much room do we have in our buildings, that was one of our biggest concerns. And Jeff can talk a little bit about what that process looked like.
So we did spend quite considerable time around youngest learners in school more, and there were a couple exercises we went through. One was looking, as Dr. Stahl was mentioning, was the practicality of students in and meeting with teachers and determining the capacity of each room and how many students could be in there with a teacher. One of the challenges is with having students in our buildings. To have all K-6, we would have to spread out our students across all the buildings in the district, including the high school, which in of itself isn't a bad concept. But when you start looking at teachers working with up to 12 to 14 students in their room based on the space of the classroom, the other part of their class is somewhere else during the course of the day or during that period of time. And so they're either with another teacher or with a paraprofessional, either having some learning or support that's happening. And once we started looking at what does that look like when a teacher is teaching students and you've got students that are transitioning to different adults throughout the day, it did not appear to be a preferable model with the amount of transition students would have during the day with different adults going from one classroom or with one adult to another adult in order to have their educational needs met. And so looking at that, that's one side. The other part that we looked at was feedback from our staff and at the table from our union representatives was the importance of students at all levels having in-person contact with their teachers. And so that's what led us to the AB flex. AB is, again, understanding where students are at academically, socially, and emotionally. There's no magical way to do that, but the importance of those connections and relationships that staff can have with students when they're there for a period of time, as well as their in-home hybrid, was a model that definitely rose to the top as we continue to do our planning and talking about the hybrid model for our students.
And then I just, one final question. Childcare, on childcare, I just wanna make sure I heard this right. So we would be doing childcare, did I hear during the day?
Yeah, so if we have space, so that's gonna go back to the space.
And I guess I'm wondering how much, like, really, like, what can that space, I mean, like, how?
Yep, so Kelly's working with each of the elementary principals to see, we're doing some different models at the elementary level with specialists. So we're possibly looking at having some of those classrooms. Remember, also, this is a fantastic year to have more space in our schools across the district, that we'll be able to use. So ideally, we'd be able to provide that child care to the children of our emergency workers. And then if there's space, if I'm a B student who's supposed to be at home learning, but parents need child care, we'd have some space for those students to be in school, getting some distance learning or some home hybrid support as they're in the school with us. But again, that's what we're hoping to be able to provide, and the degree that which we'll be able to provide this will just depend on the space and the staffing to make sure we can do it.
Thank you. Okay. Mary?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Let me bring this over here because apparently a lot of people have been complaining they can't hear us through the masks with these devices. So the first thing I want to ask is, can someone try to walk through a day with what is considered to be the live synchronous learning process? I heard that mentioned multiple times.
So is the question about, one of the three models on the dial, or Distance Learning Academy, or?
Well, I heard it referred to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a combination of the distance learning plus the hybrid or the kids in class. It was kind of mixed in with all the models, what we call live synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like the distance learning would be congruent with the kids in the classroom, and the kids that weren't in the classroom on their B day or whatever would then be able to do the same thing. But I'm not sure, and I was wondering if you could kind of do kind of a day in the life.
Sure, absolutely. And so in secondary, I think it's easier in this case to kind of separate elementary from secondary, because they're going to operate pretty differently in terms of the Distance Learning Academy. In secondary, so a student might have, English first period, math second period, so on like that. And at the beginning or at some point during that English class during first period, the teacher will have a live stream via Google Meet, either direct instruction. They might be doing something on the board, walking through a problem, walking through a question that a lot of students may have shared from the homework or something like that, walking through an example or walking through an introduction to a lesson. Maybe sharing an anticipatory set, maybe sharing this is how this connects to the bigger world, this is how this connects to your larger learning, maybe sharing something like that in a direct way. And they may be doing that for about 10 minutes. It wouldn't be the entire period, but for that 10 minutes, it would be live synchronous instruction for both the hybrid in-person students and the Distance Learning Academy students. The hybrid off-day students could certainly access that, but they wouldn't need to. And on another day, you might have more of a check for understanding. So you might have some asynchronous work that the students are working on. Think homework, but more and more student-directed and really standards-driven. They may be doing some work, and you might students might share, hey, I really struggled with this problem, could you walk through it with me? You know, you might walk through a series of math problems, or you might walk through, hey, let's just all review, how do we write that really good thesis statement? And really do that review together. You might also just have a, hey, did anyone have any questions on the homework last night? Or from the previous period, and have kind of an open question and answer period for teachers to do what they would normally do at the beginning of a class. Really check for understanding, address any misunderstandings or lack of learning, and really prepare students to move on to the next step. So that would be in any period anywhere from 10 minutes to maybe a little bit more, depending on the content, depending on the kind of the where that lesson is within the bigger unit.
So if let's say if a student, let's try elementary,
Mhm.
is on the A schedule.
Yep.
And this is a B day,
Mhm.
there's distance learners, there's hybrid B day, and then there's the B group that's in the classroom. Would they be all together then seeing the same thing?
So in elementary, in this case, elementary is gonna be, let's say there's, 25, for example, first graders who sign up for Distance Learning Academy. They're going to be with their own assigned Distance Learning Academy first grade teacher. And these may be students from all over the district, from, several different schools, but they're gonna be assigned a different teacher. And that teacher will have a structure that is a little different from that regular school day. There's still going to be live instruction, a live morning meeting, touch point, just like you would, to have some of those same routines and schedules, or and routines and habits that school really provides a lot of our students. And then in, say, the hybrid in-person day, the teacher would be providing in-person instruction, and we're working a lot with our teachers to really prioritize what is best done in person, what can be accomplished well online or at a distance. So really working with the in-person students, and then the elementary principals have a pretty detailed schedule about where the check-ins for distance learning and for hybrid home day students, where those check-in points are for them. And in that case, the hybrid students, the in-person students, would be doing something more self-directed in the classroom while the teacher has some time to check in with the off-day students if they have questions or their stuff.
So project that out then to middle school.
Yep.
Because obviously I didn't see a morning meeting
Yep.
on there, so how would that live synchronous learning work in a middle school setting?
So middle school, if you think about their regular schedule, they have 6 classes, 4 core and 2 electives and an advisory, and they're gonna have that exact same schedule. So Distance Learning Academy students would be assigned to an advisory, just like every other student was. On top of that, they'll have a distance learning coach. And depending on numbers, that could be a counselor or a dean, but somebody who just is checking in with them again to make sure they're making good progress. And let's say they have English or let's say they have math first period, and the teacher's introducing a new unit on factoring binomials, with that. And they're doing an introductory lesson, and the teacher's gonna demonstrate it on the board and basically live stream that with a Google Meet, so that the students in person, the hybrid students in person, are accessing that, and it's being recorded and live streamed for the Distance Learning Academy students. And what that enables is the students to, as students do, say, wait, can you do that again? To have that kind of live touch point of, I need you to back up a second to re-explain that to me. And it also, because those sessions in that particular example would be recorded, the students could access those at a later time.
Okay,
Through
so-
review or rewatch.
And regardless of the grade level, I assume then the same pattern for middle school happens in high school?
Yes.
Regardless of the grade level, will all students have the ability then to also play back the recordings of
Yes.
the classes? Because I know that was a big, nobody wanted to be home, but at least it allowed them to go back and listen to the lectures again, okay?
Absolutely. The only caveat I will say there is that if we cannot record classroom interactions that involve students, because then there's a student privacy issue. So if it's just the teacher and the board, or just the teacher and the example, or the video screen, that will be recorded for sure. And so students can access it whether via Schoology or CSAL.
Okay, so, one of the other question I have is obviously.
Mary, before you go to that, along that same line that you're asking about the students in school. So the elementary student that's at home, on their day at home, they're not expected to be in front of their iPad for that whole period of time. They'll have check-in times throughout the day?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
That's right.
Okay.
No, they're not just following their synchronous day from an
Okay.
iPad, no.
There is question about that, so I just wanted some clarification on that.
Yeah, there are multiple smaller checkpoints throughout the day.
Go ahead, Mary.
Now, in the high school and also in the middle school, we have integrated classrooms. And a lot of times the para would be in the classroom with the teacher. That happened a lot in the core classrooms in the high school. And we're splitting these kids up into A and B groups and distance learning. Especially with the unknowns coming in, with new Lakers coming in the 6th grade and 9th grade. How is that even going to be balanced out? Because some of these kids you don't know about until they get in here. So how is that process going to mature?
So, one of the things that we're working hard on is to make sure that we do our, we're going to be doing fast-bridge learning, as Kristen mentioned, as a way to really assess where our students are coming in with, what needs they have, and how we can best address them. And we're going to be working hard with our teachers to give them development and support to really help them address whatever those needs are. We know it's going to be different than it has been in prior years, both for new Lakers and for existing Lakers, because of the way the last 6 months has been in all of our lives and all of our communities. So that process will have to play out a bit, depending, on a foundational level, we're going to meet students' needs. If they have needs that are outlined in IEP, we'll be meeting those needs in the format that they need to be met through special education. If they have EL needs, English learning needs, we're going to be meeting those needs. It will depend. If a student has opted to go into that distance learning academy and they're going to be all at home, we're going to meet those needs differently. We're going to provide those EL services differently. It won't look the same as it would in person, because that would meet the needs of the student. Same with intervention, same with 504 accommodations. All of those needs will be met. It's just the nature and the way and the way that they will be met will be different depending on the model we're in, or if they're in the distance learning academy.
How will testing occur?
For?
In general, because we have a model where there's a heavy weighting on middle school, middle school and high school on the test. And I know that, proctoring, assistant little bugger. We know that the testing was an issue with proctoring it, et cetera. Are we changing our curriculum to adapt to regular work versus waiting on tests, and how will the tests actually occur anyways?
So what our grading model in secondary and elementary, what it emphasizes is assessment of learning at 80% minimum, and assessment for learning at 20%. So in some cases, that is a test. In other cases, that may be an essay or a project. It's that final assessment of learning that really is weighted heavier in the overall grade. So in many cases, those essays can exist just as they would. And our teachers have a variety of tools at their disposal, Turnitin.com among others, to say, was this plagiarized, were your sources original, things like that. For other hands-on projects, they can exist in a lot of the ways they always have. Our teachers, K-12, are going to be developing plans to distribute art materials to students if they're in a drawing class at high school or a painting class at high school. So some of those assessments will look just the same. Some of those assessments, that's what we're going to be working with teachers on from now until we really begin, is take a look at your curriculum, take a look at your assessments, and think about what works when you change this into a distance or hybrid model, what doesn't, what just doesn't make sense, and how can you remake that assessment so that it is assessing the same standards, the same outcomes, to the same level of depth and rigor, but maybe it has to look different, because maybe a test that you could administer in a class under really careful circumstances, maybe that doesn't work. Or maybe you have to think differently about how you chunk that, or things like that. So some of those things will change.
Okay. Another question is about Lalo de Lago. I know there was a lot of frustration with parents, given that they don't necessarily speak Spanish. the distance learning was quite challenging. And hybrid probably won't help as much. So are there changes to that curriculum model that are gonna take place? How is that gonna work?
So for Distance Learning Academy, and again, this is completely dependent on both board approval of the overall model and on numbers of parents who are interested. We'll know that after August 14th. But it could look like, if there aren't the numbers to demand a grade level teacher, say a 5th grade level teacher, it could be a level teacher who teaches maybe 3 to 4 to 5 students, and differentiates between those. And our teachers are pretty great at that. So they will have a Spanish speaker to make sure that they're getting that immersive experience. Now for hybrid students, they're going to be getting that Spanish immersion experience on hybrid in-person days, and because elementary has built in some of those checkpoints, they're going to have more immersion experience on those hybrid off days than they would. It is still not as good or comparable to being in a classroom with a Spanish immersion teacher every day, you know. But we're making this the absolute best experience we possibly can, if given the constraints of that hybrid model.
I think, Kevin, too, to your point, another point you've made is, pending approval tonight of moving forward, we have approximately a month left before school starts. And there's a tremendous amount of work and logistics that still do need to be flushed out and fine-tuned to address some of the issues that we had from last spring. The idea is not, we're not looking to replicate what we did last spring. We're looking to be better. And how do we improve? How do we connect with kids differently? Again, you know, you raised some good questions. You know, there are some things that I guess are more, that work better through in-person than, say, through a Google Meet. You know, how are we assessing students? What does that look like? And I think that that's something that we're going to be committed to helping teachers, supporting teachers, and supporting students in identifying those best practices, or I guess at one point they were called promising practices, but then to replicate and start to share those ideas with other teachers. I know some of our best professional development that we've ever done has been teachers sharing their ideas around what has worked and collaborating about what they found success with. And so we have to continue to rely on our classroom experts, the ones that are working with students, when it comes to pedagogy and new strategies and new ways of doing things, to start to give them permission to practice, to try, to take a risk, and then to support them as they go through that process, and as they find success, celebrate it, replicate it. If they find it didn't work out, well, support them. You know, hey, what did you find from that practice that is still something that can continue, or that we can do at another time? And so that is going to be key over the next month, as well as we get into the school year with any hybrid or distance learning model component.
So we talked a lot about we're following the Department of Health plans. And I know that from speaking with parents, I don't know anybody who doesn't want their kid to be in person. But if we start and right away we have an outbreak, and I haven't really heard of the emergency plans, but Maureen, I'm sure that there's something that we're not gonna wait until the following Wednesday or whatever to actually clear out the schools and go directly into distance learning. There is a lot of concern about the inconsistency and the volatility, not only of the numbers, but also the swapping back and forth to follow, you know, a grid that maybe we're gonna be on the cusp of going into the next level. So the transition and the impact of the transition is something that I know that I received a lot of questions on. I would have questions on that too. Could you kind of go through those processes and how the impact to the student learning and also the resources utilized by our already quite overstressed and overcapacitated staff are going to handle that?
Do you want to speak to the process of?
I'm happy to. You know, I think one of the things that we've known since last spring was that we were expected to build a plan in which we could seamlessly transition from one model to the other. And that was one of our checkpoints all summer as we planned. So if you heard some of those components, of home hybrid days, there are some components that are similar to what distance learning will be, both that synchronous opportunity to meet with the whole class online, and then the independent expectation for independent work as well. So, our teachers, and to Jeff's point, we have been working all summer, and will continue to work to ensure that our teachers have the PD that they need and the support that they need to do that. But I think the moving back and forth, the hybrid model, which, I hope our data holds, and that's exactly how we can start, because I think that interaction between students and teachers, even if it's not for very long, to build relationships is really, really important. If they can do the hybrid and make sure that while they're together face-to-face, they're also training students with some of the other ways that they use technology in those distant learning days. Should that happen, we'll be ahead of the game with that. And then I think it's going to be a lot of communication, making sure that staff and kids are confident, making sure that we communicate well with families, so that number one, they know well in advance, if we're able to do it well in advance, when we'll make those transitions, as well as we talked a little bit earlier about, in some cases, trying to do it as quickly as possible so that we don't lose learning days. Jeff, what do you
Yeah,
think of that?
I would say seamless transition is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, I think.
It sounds good.
It sounds great. It's highly aspirational, but we know that there's going to be a transition. When we're in from a hybrid learning, when you're on the A/B flex A/B, there's a transition until you are used to it. And you know which days you're going, what do those days look like when you're there relative to when you're doing hybrid home, what do those days look like? That's why we're trying to keep things as consistent as possible with our staff, with our families, with communication and attendance, so that we're minimizing the amount of change within school, so that we can help families and students manage the change of coming to school, being at home, and working through all of those different curriculum content areas. As we go through the year, it will start to get better. I mean, there's going to have to be things that we have to evolve. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of logistical things we need to continue working on leading up to the start of the year. And we're gonna have to continue to work through some of those logistical challenges that we find out with flex days or with transportation or child nutrition services. I mean, there are things that we need time to flush out. With that said, we've had a great opportunity since last spring through co-curriculars, targeted services, our credit recovery at the ALC, where we've had students come in where we've worked through the protocols and procedures of the Department of Health, where we've had students practicing in pods with their coaches. We've had students coming in, connecting with their teachers online, as well as being at home in a hybrid. Certainly it's not almost 9,000 students coming in, but we've had we've had groups where we've had staff and students in throughout the summer since last spring, connecting with teachers, learning, and so we've been able to practice how some of this would work. And so again, small scale, but those small scale learnings are going to help us plan for the large scale learning that we start with the school year.
What I was really referring to though is, let's say we have so many staff, we have an outbreak at the school, and we need to immediately move from hybrid to distance learning, or the numbers pass a certain threshold and we go one way or the other, and we have minimal time to adjust. And what I'm asking is that transition, not necessarily between the daily hybrid going back and forth. People want some consistency. They'd rather be consistently wrong than inconsistent. But if we do start to pass that, it's true. They got one place to fix it, right? If you're consistently wrong, at least there's predictability. And there's been a lot of concern. I know I have it when you see the numbers in the community going up, and we're going to follow this grid. If we have this plan down, and nothing's going to really be proven until you've done it for a couple weeks, right? And then all of a sudden, we have an outbreak at the high school, the middle school, or the elementary, or something happens, and we have to immediately pivot. how are we going to handle that? And then you gotta pivot back once the numbers go back up, et cetera.
So-
So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that is something that we've thought through, and that goes with that, one of the slides in there, to go to more restrictive. To your point about if there is something that is an outbreak, or for some reason, we have staff that are in quarantine, or our attendance starts to drop, or we start seeing certain schools maybe having a higher rate, we're allowed to, or we're afforded the opportunity through the Stay Safe Minnesota to act more quickly and more responsibly in order to mitigate some of those effects. And so having, again, Department of Health is gonna be a player in that conversation. I know Dr. Stadel, you're central in those conversations, working with the
teams.
you know, and also our incident command team say, you know, this is what the data is doing. So then, once we make that decision to go more restrictive, then it is communication, and adjusting so that we can go to that more restrictive, which in this case would be distance learning, and also prepare families and staff for that transition. On the flip side, going less restrictive, which is what at some point we all hope will happen someday, that takes a little bit more time. It takes at least 2 weeks. Once we start looking at the data and we start seeing that cases are coming down or leveling off, and we start to go down in some of those thresholds, it takes longer to go back to a more least restrictive setting. And again, there's some transition that's involved in that as well. I think we'd love to say, hey, let's come back to in-person tomorrow. But we also know that we have to ensure that our protocols to become less restrictive will meet and also maintain that we're successful in that environment that's less restrictive than the one that we were at before. It would never be anyone's recommendation to try to move too quickly or to get to a place where we're less restrictive, and then what we see in, obviously what you see in other countries or in other school districts that have opened in other parts of the country, where cases ramp up and all of a sudden districts have to go back into a more restrictive setting. And so Department of Health, the Department of Education, I know the county partners, as well as they're going to be helping us with this, as well as us looking at our data around what does that look like for our students and our families for health and safety.
We will also have, and I think it's 5 days, but there's been a lot of documents that I've been looking at, but we do have the opportunity, should we need some time for those transition days, that they won't be counted against us as instructional days from MDE.
The next thing I was gonna ask is
Yep.
about, this transition, and
Yeah.
if we go back and forth, how is that gonna actually affect? And have we built in that cushion for instructional hours and days?
And MDE is gonna have to be, I think, incredibly flexible with school districts about that. While we're not significantly changing our school calendar with these models, we are looking at that early release day on several Wednesdays, but we still are expecting students to be released, who were in school, to be released to distance learning. So we'll maintain those instructional minutes, but there are several districts that have shortened the student contact hours. So I think we're all assuming that MDE has got to loosen up some of those strict guidance when we're in a pandemic.
And I just have 2 more questions, if you can humor me for that. One is, I know that the teachers have mentioned a huge concern about their safety coming back, and therefore it's incredibly important that the protocols that are in place be followed. And we've talked at length in both individual meetings as well as in general about the law, and that if you're inside, you're gonna be masked. How is that actually going to be enforced? And I know that this has been somewhat answered, but, and are we going to have some sort of agreement with parents or kids who come back that, hey, these are the rules? Because I think that would not only help the people that have to work in the schools to feel some sort of protection, but also be very consistent on those rules. So there isn't a lot of wiggle room, because, if you've got a high school student that's running around without a mask and refuses to wear one, it's not about dealing with that student, it's about dealing with every other student that sees them. And says, hey, he can do it, why not me? Or she could do it, that sort of thing. So that has been a concern, and I just want to hear from you guys have a
Certainly.
record about how that's gonna be handled.
Yeah, you know, thanks for asking the question, and we've got a bunch of principals that we can also pull in, because there's certainly gonna have to be the folks who implement and support teachers in implementing this. You know, number one, we'll use this as an opportunity for education. You know, we care about each other in this community, and we're going to help each other be as safe and healthy as we can by wearing masks, right? That's the really nice way that we wanna build community in our classrooms and help each other take care of each other. The second part of that is, it's the law. And, you know, we have provided an opportunity, if there are parents or students who refuse to wear masks, that we do have the Distance Learning Academy for them. You know, the last thing we want to do is have teachers police kids with masks. And there's going to be some of that, just like 30 years ago there was with gum chewing, right? I mean, I know the masks are far more serious, but I think it's going to be those routines and those habits, and our principals and administrators will support our teachers as they implement that.
And communication too on the forefront. You know, that there is a communication around the law, around the practices. Certainly mask wearing, but also social distancing, and, you know, frequent hand washing, and, you know, again, families and students going through that self-assessment every day. You know, there's a commitment on families that, you know, everybody is part of this solution, part of this deal. That when you're coming to school, you're doing your self-assessment, there's a personal responsibility there. Coming to school, wearing a mask, as the law says, educating students, but also too, if they're not gonna wear a mask, then they shouldn't be there. They can't be there, because that is part of what we're trying to create, a safe experience for our staff and for our students, until there is no longer a mask mandate, and it's no longer the law.
Is this going to be communicated in some way that's more, and I wouldn't say contractual, but close to it, so that all the parents and the students are aware that when they sign up for hybrid, that these are the rules of engagement within the schools? Or is this gonna be like sitting down with the kids on the first couple of days and educating them that way? What is the?
I think it'll be both, you know, later tonight we'll be seeking approval on a mask policy.
Okay.
So just like, you know, again, it's our responsibility, the board passed this policy, it's our responsibility to enforce those policies. So I think that's part of the education as we start the year, to say, what are some of those policies that are updated and new, and certainly the mask policy as well as law will be a part of that. And then I think it's also gonna be, right, part of our PD or onboarding of our kids as we get started. Hey, we're gonna now have to do some PD around masks, and what do I do with my mask when I eat, and what do I do with my mask, right? So it'll be, I think, that two-pronged approach.
Okay. And my final question is Joe was up here and he was kind of explaining about the process of testing and reporting and all that. And I'm kind of fuzzy on that, simply because, for instance, I've got kids in college, and in California and New York, it doesn't matter whether they self-report. Once they go in there and give their name and take the COVID test, and it tests positive, then automatically their employers, their university, et cetera, is notified. So there's not a lot of self-reporting even involved. Once that positive test comes out, it becomes record within the privacy requirements, but it's considered more of a safety protocol that they passed within those states. So I'm not aware of how Minnesota's doing it. Are you gonna find out if somebody tests positive, whether of anybody that's employed or a student within the school district? Are you gonna find out only by self-reporting, or is there other mechanisms that the Minnesota Department of Health will help with while maintaining the privacy of the individual?
Yeah, the Department of Health said they would work directly with us. So the point of us reporting is, one, we have a staff member or a family that is saying, I'm not going to be at school for the next X amount of days because I have tested positive. Then the point of us contacting the Department of Health is to begin that tracing process, so we can figure out who that individual may have been in contact with. The Department of Health already is gonna know that that person has tested positive because their name is in the system. However, that doesn't necessarily give them the information of that is a student at Prairie Lake High School, they were in a first-hour English class with so-and-so.
Right.
And so putting the two pieces together is how we're gonna be able to begin that tracing process.
Okay. Is there a threshold that we're working with that? Let's say if there's so many people within proximity or days or capacity or anything like that, is there?
So what we're being told right now is we're gonna take every case individually. And so when we contact the Department of Health, they're gonna work with us. And like I said, it begins with that situation of what are the seating charts. That's why it's so important that we be able to track our students. In the classroom seating charts, on the buses seating charts, in the lunchroom seating charts, any place that they are for extended periods of time, we need to make sure that we have a record and track of who they are with and who they are by, so that we can begin that process right away.
Thank you.
All right, we need to move on. Is there any other questions from the other board members?
Yes, I'll go.
Jonathan?
So, Joe, you shouldn't have let you, come on back. Kind of appending to that question, when we do have a student or a staff member test positive, what are the instructions that will be going to the families? When will they be allowed back? What is that process? Just speak to that briefly.
So here's the current Department of Health recommendations. So if you have a student that has, or staff member for that matter, that has tested positive, they are not able to return for at least 10 days from when symptoms began and have been fever-free for more than 24 hours without medication. If you are a person who has been a confirmed exposure, so for example, if my child tested positive, I would be a confirmed exposure, I'm not allowed to return for 14 days. My son may actually be able to return sooner than myself to school because the incubation period is 2 to 14 days, and that's why my quarantine time is 14 days. His isolation time is only 10 days from the start of the symptoms and the 24 hours fever-free.
And so, because we are enforcing social distancing properly, are we saying the rest of the class can still come back? What's going to happen?
That would be our hope, based on, as soon as I contact the Department of Health, they're going to say, what are your seating charts? Where has the person been? Who have they been in contact with? So that we can quickly identify if there's someone who may fall into that category of an exposure that we need to notify directly.
Okay, thank you. It just has the potential to ripple quickly.
Absolutely.
And I know that's what you're planning on and preparing for, so I appreciate that. Maureen, real quickly, I was just gonna ask, you talked about supplies and PPE and everything. With shortages out there in the world and all the challenges, how confident are you that you feel great that you're well stocked and ready to go, and that's how we're gonna keep our staff safe, right?
Yep, absolutely. So we currently have 12,450 disposable masks, adult size, on hand, and we have 2,000 youth size on hand. And this is just the district has purchased, and this is not considering any
What's coming from
supplies. We do not have cloth masks on hand. We are expecting 1,500 for staff from the state, and 8,800 for youth from the state. For face shields, we currently have, we ordered 1,000, currently have 933 still that we have not distributed. So we do have enough for the requirement of 100% of licensed staff and 50% of non-certified staff. And for sanitizer, we have purchased it in 1 liter pump bottles. We have, we've purchased 2,000 total. We currently have 1,307 bottles on hand. And we also purchased gloves. These are not the latex-free gloves that you would use for some processes. They're more like a food service grade, so that we can, this is for handling student items. And we purchased 1,000 of those. So I think we're in really good shape for the start of the year, especially considering that we're doing, 30% capacity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
I guess my last question, Russ Reitz, I'm hoping that you might be able to give us an idea. I know it was a challenge with the summer programs with students in the buildings, and we had I guess what you might refer to as smoke breaks. What have we learned? What was that process like? Can you just share what was happening this summer and what you experienced?
Sure. Well, we implemented protocols this summer that required students social distance while checking in. So attendance was taken. The health screening questions were asked. So students had to confirm that they didn't have any of the symptoms listed on that MDH health screening. And then students were asked to sanitize hands. They were put into pods. Those pods were asked to not cross-contaminate with other pods. We limited pods in the gyms to 1 pod of 25 per court, and we limited pods outside on the football field to 4 pods of 25. So regardless of all of the protocols we had in place, we did have several students test positive throughout the summer with COVID. And we had a process for reporting. Mr. Kabushek shared that process with you. The reporting piece went rather well. The contact tracing, I believed, went well. The communication with families that had a son or daughter in the pod with someone that tested positive, they were notified really within that same day of us being notified. And so in a lot of ways, we were able to eliminate further transmission. I will say we had, most of our indoor sports had a positive case that caused us at some point to shut down a session. So gymnastics did, volleyball did, boys basketball did, girls basketball did. And a lot of those cases, when we were talking with the families, many of those exposures happened outside of our programming. So, it was a learning opportunity for all of us, I think, not just the educators in our community, but our community at large in terms of number of interactions, and, the things that if they're traveling for an AAU tournament or a club tournament, or if they're going to graduation parties, those types of things were usually, when we met with the families, the cause of the positive test.
Thank you. So
That's it? Wait, Russ, since you're up here. I have a question on, the consistency. I've been asked that, that we're asking kids to come to school, just twice a week, and then we've got student athletes that are, I'm not sure how many times a week they're there, and breaking those into small groups. And my understanding is if they're in pods and one pod goes down, that doesn't mean the other pod has to go down when I say quit by going down. But then when there's competitions, they're all together?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, correct. If you're a cross-country runner, you're likely going to practice in a pod of 12, and that would be your pod that you compete with, too, when you go compete.
Okay.
In tennis, you're likely going to be in a pod of 2 for practice, but you will play somebody from another community that obviously wouldn't be in your pod. If you're a doubles player, you're likely going to be placed in a pod of 4. And so, even though you're on the team, we're still trying to limit interaction between members of that team. But to your question, once students are in school in their AB hybrid or AB flex AB, they're going to go to their sport each day after school if they're in a sport. So regardless of whether they're in school that day. So we do know that if they choose to participate in a co-curricular, the number of interactions they have in a day will increase. And they may see somebody in their sport, in their pod, that they wouldn't have seen during the school day. So, in terms of tracking, like Joe said, with who they sit with on the bus and who they sit with at lunch and who they sit by in the classroom, we have to do that same sort of tracking after school.
Okay. I know the high school league has their own guidelines too, so just curious about that.
Russ, I have a quick question while you're up there, if you don't mind. One of the questions I didn't ask was about activities, music and choir and things like that. How is that going to be handled in the hybrid and the distance learning for students?
Well, I can speak a little bit to the curricular part of the day, but if Dr. Busick wanted to come up and discuss what individual lessons in small group looks like. They've been doing that all summer through community ed, and it's gone quite well. In terms of the co-curricular piece, we're still very much in the planning phase. We do have a desire from our band and choir teachers to provide a performance experience outside. So Does that mean they can be in the stadium with a limited number of seating? We think we can still do something creative like that outdoors safely. But again, we still need more information, do a little bit more work as an administrative team to decide what those co-curricular experiences look like. Do you want to talk about those hybrid classes and groups? We did talk about organizing kids by instrument into pods, and so whether they're pep band or jazz band or marching band, that they're always kind of with those students.
Same thing as with activities, we're trying to organize kids into smaller groups. We're trying to find alternative spaces, can we use the auditorium, can we be outside? We've got, new activity center, so we're just looking for ways to space kids out. And they're looking at, what is the guidance from their support organizations from around the country, what are best practice, and we're looking at other things that we could, purchase to help, different types of masks, and we're just trying, we said I don't want to stop kids from performing, it's just, we just want to do it safely, so we don't want to take away the opportunity. They were worried that people were going to say, oh, we can't sing. Well, no, we just got to be smart about it, we got to find ways to do it in a safe manner. So that's what we're working on right now. So they were pleased about that, and we just said, let's just continue to look at what's best practice out there, and we'll support the things that we need to do so that kids still get the opportunities.
Thank you. It's 7 o'clock, and our meeting is supposed to start, but I'd like to hear briefly from the other board members that are here, and then we'll go into our meeting. But for those listening in the audience and the public, we're still in our work session. We haven't started the meeting yet, but we will continue briefly with other board members if they have anything else to add. Michael, did you have any other
I've run
questions
in
that
several
might come?
times this week, so I'm comfortable moving on to the meeting.
Okay. Melissa?
Move on to the meeting.
Enrique?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I had a question on the determining a safe learning model data. So from what I heard Dr. Stallo say, we'll take a look and we'll work closely with Scott County Department of Health on the number of cases per 10,000 residents by county of residents. And based off of the data, we'll move forward with a hybrid learning model, but I didn't hear what the data said.
Yep,
Where does it fit within these numbers?
The data that I got on Friday, so that was from July 22nd through through August 4th, put us at a 23.7. So again, I guess it's not up there, but that puts us in the range of that hybrid for both. If we were up toward that 30 range, that would be the distance learning. That would be a hybrid for the elementary and distance learning for secondary.
Okay, thank you. And I think the rest of my colleagues did a good job of asking a lot of the other questions that I also had on my mind.
Okay. I have one quick question for Emily.
Yes.
If you come up here.
Yeah.
When we've got kids coming into the school day, obviously you'll be feeding them in the school. The kids at home, if they're needing a lunch, how are you doing that, or are we able to do that?
We are able to do that. The bones of that program will look a lot like what we did in the spring. However, the way that we distribute those meals will be a little bit different. We currently will be running the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program, which is where we would have to identify students and, based on their eligibility, charge them for that. So it won't be the summer.
It won't be the waiver that we had.
The waiver, correct. The summer food service waiver, USDA said they're not going to revisit looking at renewing the summer food service waiver. However, there is a bill in the House right now proposing a universal free meals, free breakfast and free lunch for all students. So it's just worded differently. It would obviously give everybody free meals like we did in the spring, just it'll be called something different. But for now, we will be bundling meals. We're working with transportation and all the sites at probably doing a pickup just on that flex day, just on Wednesday. So any students that are doing the hybrid model would pick up 3 meals, 3 breakfasts and 3 lunch, because we would assume that they would be eating their other 2 meals while they're in school on those 2 days. And then anybody who's doing distance learning 100% would be picking up 5 meals.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
as I said when we started, all of us had a chance to talk with Dr. Stallo and Jeff Holmberg about this whole plan. So we have a lot of questions that were answered and a lot more that were answered tonight through the presentation. And we will be going over this again during our board meeting shortly. But before we do that, we have one more agenda item, which is the mask policy. This just came out from MSBA this morning or yesterday. I'm not quite sure when we got the email. And I'm not sure if you have it in your work session packet right now. If it's not there, it's for sure in the board meeting. And if anyone has any comments about it, if you've had a chance to look at it, otherwise we will take it to the meeting. Any preference?
Let's just take it to the meeting.
Okay, let's take it to the meeting then. So the work session is adjourned, and at 7:15 we will begin the